Welcome viewers to this series of discussions around forests development and sustainability. We have had previous discussions around this theme and we shall be taking it forward, trying to bring together the earlier nodes that we discussed related to conservation efforts on part of the colonial government in India in the modern times, particularly ever since 1864, when the first Imperial Forest Department was formed. And what we shall try to do today is to, over these two lectures today, is to trace the development and alongside analyze it as to how a major part of the structure, even a strategy of conservation during the colonial period carried over into the independent Indian period as well, and therefore some of the problems that plagued the colonial forestry, the pretense of scientificity and several other claims towards social forestry, etc., actually is a carryover into the modern period, into the independent Indian period from the colonial period itself. So the colonial legacy is very much evident and has carried over well into the independent Indian period related to forestry as well. So this is about also traditions of ecological prudence and profligacy of scientific forestry in India from the colonial times to the present. Now, if you see, as we just discussed, forest policies in independent India, these are initial preliminaries, and then we shall get into the substantive part of the discussion. So, forest policies in independent India still carry significant perspectival, classificatory and methodological legacy overloads from its first enactment during the colonial times in 1894. When I say first enactment during the colonial times in 1894, is because in 1894 a kind of statement of intent was made by the colonial government related to forestry, where things like scientific forestry and the categorizations and the legal provisions which were very stringent related to violations of what constituted reserved forests or state forests and all kinds of classificatory terms that we get to see related to conservation efforts in terms of forest. All those things were spoken about with fair degree of clarity and assertion. So that's one of the milestones that we use in our discussion related to forestry. Now, even in the independent India, what you get to see that the National Forest Policy of 1942, that is immediately after independence, barring some departures, largely upheld the fundamental concepts of 1894 policy statement on forestry. When I say fundamental concepts of 1894 policy statement, it is essentially about ownership, as to how the ownership of forests or forest areas had to be taken away from its traditional communal control, where communities exercise some kind of right, unwritten right, mandated by tradition itself, and the life of the communities living around forest areas were organically linked with forest areas, and it had an impact of its own in terms of usage of forestry resources, which we will discuss as to how technology, particularly in the sector of transportation and communication, had greatly transformed the nature of demand itself, not only the scale, but nature of demand of forest products itself, and that had ramifications on the degree to which forest resources were to be harnessed, and that could not have happened with the existing traditional ways in which forests were understood in terms of ownership, in terms of shared ownership, with reference to the communities surrounding it. So that had to be altered, that had to be knocked down, that had to be ruptured in order to allow, I would say, exploitation or harnessing of forest resources. And for that, there were commercial pressures, companies, demand supply lures and so forth, profit lures. And for that, the state had to intervene. State had to intervene to take away that traditional ownership by community, take it on itself. So the state started to own it, and thereby made it easy for the private entrepreneurs or commercial enterprises to use forest resources at a damn cheap price. So it is a kind of I would say subsidized provision of forest resources as input for massive industrialization that had been undertaken immediately after independence as part of the Nehruvian model of development, in contrast to what Gandhi had proposed in terms of developmental paradigm for independent India. So that departure, or I would say not departure, I would say that choice that independent India made in favor of Nehruvian model of development meant that the Gandhian appeal for pre-industrial, pre-commercial kind of organic relationship between communities and forests or nature in general had to be done away with. And why it is being done away with, what are the forces working beneath this, and those are the things that will automatically get unraveled as we proceed through this discussion. So, in the absence of any fundamental departure from colonial practices of conservation and management of forests, even in independent India, what basically is happening is substitution of strategic imperial needs with demands generated by commercial Indian sector of independent India. So for forest, if one were to visualize it as a forest, so if I am a forest, for me it is more exploitation of resources, my resources, timber and several other herbs and so forth. So I would not know what is the political authority doing it. So now that India is independent, the imperial needs are not impacting the forest resources, but it is substituted by commercial needs, and this commercial need is phenomenal in terms of degree, right? And so for the ecology or ecological balance and so forth, for sustenance of forests, it's business as usual, the way it was carried out during the colonial times. In fact, it became more stringent in terms of, or I would say more powerful in terms of commercial lure. So it broadly inherited the institutional framework of the colonial forest control and management. So forest department, the way they were going about their business of managing the forest. So largely it continued without much of a alteration, even in independent India. Of course, with the erstwhile princely states now integrated into it. So princely states earlier were a little more autonomous with respect to British imperial policy. Now it is independent Indian policy with the princely states now uniformly attached to Indian state as usual, and there is no separate identity as such. So those laws had seamless application even over the princely state territories, erstwhile princely state territories. It did nothing to alter, rather reinforced states' rights to control or exclusive control over forest protection, production and management. So that's the point that we were making, that so far as ownership or exclusive control of the state over forest management, production and protection are concerned, they continued the way they existed during the colonial period, and we have already discussed as to why the state is trying to take control of forests. Of course, the optics in colonial India is that they want to manage it, better on the lines of sustainability, maintaining forest canopy cover and so forth. But any deeper analysis would reveal that it is the ways and means by which the state is providing forest resources for commercial lures, which is at work beneath the veneer of conservation, even in the colonial period. So another thing that gets realized as we try to analyze forest policies during the colonial period is that, and we get to hear this very often, that this conservation effort is being made on very scientific lines. So this is what was debated all through the years between 1865, when first Forest Act was made, immediately after the creation of Forest Department, Imperial Forest Department in the preceding year, that is 1864, down to 1878, when another revised Forest Act was made in colonial India. And in between that, there is a lot of debate that triggers amongst the academicians, amongst the forest management experts, and it had a lot of shadow of what was being debated even in Europe and even Americas. So those ideas of classifying forested areas and managing them in a particular way by harnessing or by cutting trees, by felling trees for timber, and replenishing it in a particular way by selecting a particular species of plant or tree which are to be used, and how to replenish it. So all those strategies that were deployed here in India had reverberations of what was happening in conservation debate in Europe, right? So the principles that were worked out for forestry in Europe and Americas, and please remember, Europe and America are also undergoing industrialization in the 19th century, second half of the 19th century. We are talking of the second half of the 19th century. Railways has come in a big way. In India, it is introduced. Railway lines are being laid in the 1850s, and it is immediately after that the need for creating a forest department was felt, and it was created to manage forest resources better, because if you look at the immediate prelude to introduction of railways in India, it's reckless felling of trees for the required quality of timber. In fact, there were 6 species that were identified: teak, sal, devdar, and so forth. So sub-Himalayan forests and even North Arcot forests in south, they were all very recklessly, I would say, trampled upon, and so many inappropriate species were cut, species of trees were cut, whereas the appropriate requirement would be limited to 5. So one data says that while the requirement was of 5 or 6 species, the actual number of species that were recklessly cut in terms of trees were to the tune of 50. So it was that badly done. And just to make some kind of a better management of this supply line for say railways, or for even steam engines used in shipping and so forth, Forest Department comes into being, and scientific forestry is introduced. But the point to remember is that this scientific, within quotes, the scientific principles of forest conservation were actually developed in the West and were suited to the largely temperate climatic reality. And one has to understand the difference between the climatic conditions of Europe and Americas and that of India, which was a colony at that point of time. Indian forests largely were tropical, humid forests, in contrast to largely temperate forests, or temperate climatic kind of forests, the way it existed in Europe and so forth. Now, the very nature of temperate climatic forests, the way it existed in Europe, ensured that it lent itself to scientific forestry better, and there was no survey done for checking the appropriateness of this so-called scientific technique of forestry over a new reality of tropical humid forests. So there was no study undertaken that this is a new condition, and the ecological interdependence across species in tropical conditions would be more complex as compared to what it was in the temperate ecological conditions, and such kind of studies were just not undertaken. And these strategies that were largely developed for temperate climatic reality in Europe were uncritically foisted over Indian conditions, which is different, which is tropical, which is humid, in contrast to the European reality. And it was all done through creation of Forest Departments, 1864, Forest Acts, 1865, and then subsequently revised in 1878, because 1865 Forest Act was very hurriedly prepared, and then finally the policy statement that we earlier alluded to in 1894. What we get to understand in this is that the techniques deployed led to profligacy in expenditure and resource use, so far as carrying out forestry in India is concerned, which was labeled as scientific. And during the colonial as well as post-independence periods, it is this profligacy in expenditure and resource use that accounts for its unpopularity and social inappropriateness, the recklessness with which trees were cut, the kind of resources that were deployed, and perhaps they were not suited to Indian realities. It is not only the ecological or biological interdependence that is in question here, it is also the way communities are associated with forest areas in a particular way. Remember, India has a long civilizational history, and there are traditions of using forest resources with inbuilt kind of proscription for not taming animals in their reproductive seasons, for not cutting specific trees in particular seasons, and they were all I would say couched in religion, religiosity, traditions, rites, rituals, and so forth. But beneath that, there were principles of sustainable usage of forest resources that were at work. Of course, I am not suggesting that degree of forest resources or forest products required post-industrialization was something that could have been tackled through those traditional ways and means. Nevertheless, if we are making an assessment of what is happening, we must talk about it, because it is that prudence of traditional ways and means by which forest resources were used, that organic connect of communities with forest resources is ruptured through these policies, through the ways and means that were devised to actually cater to the increased demand on account of industrialization, railway introduction, steam engine, and so forth. But the pretense given to it through official proclamations and acts was as if scientific ways and means are being developed to conserve and manage forests better. So it is this particular aspect that we are trying to dissect today, we are trying to analyze today, and we shall be talking about it further in the next part of this lecture. Thank you.